And then we have to ask ourselves, the next question is that what is special about Mitzrayim? All the places in the world where they could have been enslaved, why was it specifically Mitzrayim? Now, about the enslavement in general, let me point out what I think is the pshat, the correct interpretation of a very difficult part of the Haggadah on Pesach. After we break the middle matzah, and now we have a broken piece, so we declare halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, the bread of poverty, the achalu avasana ba'arid Mitzrayim, which our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. In Chumash, the matzah is called lachamoni, and the Ramban explains because as slaves we were given very meager rations, lachem tsar, very, very meager food to eat, and the matzah commemorates that. The matzah also, by the way, is a symbol of the swiftness of the redemption. Matzah isn't given time to rise. Likewise, the Jews were chased out of Mitzrayim very, very, very swiftly. But the matzah also is a symbol of enslavement. And we break the middle of matzah, leaving only half, because the Gemara says, Darchei shalani b'prusa, it's the way of a poor man to have half a loaf. He can't allow himself the luxury of eating a whole loaf. He has to stash half away for tomorrow. Who knows what tomorrow will bring? So likewise, we put half away for the Afikama, we're left with half a loaf. And this is the bread of poverty, the bread of affliction. And this commemorates our enslavement in Egypt. Then we go on to say two things in this introductory paragraph, which at first glance have no connection. First we say, whoever is hungry, let him come and eat. Whoever is in need, let him come celebrate the Pesach. And then we say, Hashata Abdi, now we are slaves. L'shana haba, next year may we be free. So this paragraph really has three things that have at first glance no connection. First, we identified the broken piece of matzah as being the bread of affliction that we ate in Egypt. Number two, we extend this invitation to all to come and participate, and we conclude with a prayer for the coming of Mashiach and the next year. I mean, how are these three different things lumped together? And I think the correct answer is this. When a person goes through a very, very tough time, a very bad experience, very often the person doesn't even want to think about it. I don't even think about what it was like. It's too awful to remember. You meet people that have gone through hard times. It could be illness, it could be financial difficulties, and Baruch Hashem, they pull through it. They don't want to even think about what was. Holocaust. No, we don't do that. We don't do that. Apparently, it's important at the Seder not only to talk about the wonders and the miracles and the freedom, but we have to relive the enslavement. That's the idea of bringing up the matzah, bringing up the lachamoni. That's an important element of it. Now, the reason it's an important element of it, I think, is, as the Gemara says in Pesachim. It says in Pesachim, on the verse, when Mashiach comes, Vayomahu, on that day, Yiyah Hashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, God will be one and His name is one. So the Gemara says that Olam Haba, the world to come, and in this context it means the Moshe Mashiach, the Messianic age, is not like nowadays. Very, very different. Because nowadays, when good things happen, the blessing you say is Atay V'Hametiv. When misfortune occurs, the blessing you say is Dayan Ha'emes. In the next world, meaning in the Messianic age, whether good things happen or bad things happen, we'll always say Atay V'Hametiv. So the Salach asks the question, the Yehuda asks the question, what bad things do we anticipate happening in the Messianic age? What does it mean? When Mashiach comes, even on the bad things, we'll say Atay V'Hametiv. What bad is going to occur then? So the Yehuda says it's not what it means. Of course nothing bad will happen in Mashiach's time. It means that when Mashiach comes, we will recite a retrospective Atay V'Hametiv. We will look back over the entire course of Jewish history and we'll understand why exactly everything had to happen and how it was for a positive benefit. That's how the Neighbor understands it. And I heard many times from a footnote, who used to say like this, as a matter of faith, we believe that everything is for the good. Everything God does is for the good. So what would be if nowadays a person would experience some misfortune and say, listen, I know this is for the best, and therefore, although the halacha says that the proper blessing is dayan ha'emes, but I know this is for the good, and therefore I am going to say atayv ha'meitiv. So as a footnote, it will be a bracha levatala. We're taking God's name in vain. Because what Chazal are teaching us is that in this world we cannot appreciate the good which is within misfortune. We'd be saying empty words. It wouldn't be a bracha. A bracha has to come from the depths of your heart. If you go through the motions and you say the right words, but you don't really feel it, it's not really a bracha. And he used to say over in benching at a chasna, at a wedding, so we say that when Mashiach comes, oz ilaim b'shir yarom, then the mute will burst forth into song. It's really based on a pasuk, Yeshaya, Bataron Lashon ilaim, that the mute will burst into song. So he used to say, what does this mean, the mute will burst into song? He said there are certain things that we cannot express in this word. We're mute. We can't express them. In order to thank God for the misfortunes, that's something we cannot say. When Mashiach's time, we'll be given the understanding. Now, how that understanding will come is a good question. One possibility is that Eliezer will tell us. Eliezer is a prophet. He has Ruach HaKodesh, and he'll tell us exactly the meaning of all the past events. It may be that when all the loose ends of the plot come together, we'll understand it ourselves. Sometimes you have a story and nothing seems to make sense, but then in the end there's the one bit of information that is provided, and now everything makes sense. So maybe that's the way it'll happen in Mashiach. But this isn't a beauty. However it happens, we will recite a retrospective hatayv ha'meitiv. And the idea is that geula, redemption, is not merely relief from persecution. Redemption is only complete when we can look back at the past and understand it. It makes sense. We understand this is the way it had to be, and it was for the best, and there was a tangible benefit that we received from it. That's when we are truly redeemed.
It's the only way we could really learn from history, is to understand it.
It's not just to learn from history, but it's to understand that it had to be this way. So let's ask ourselves the question, what benefit do we have from having been enslaved in Mitzrayim? The first enslavement. What are the tangible benefits we receive? In what way was the Shibud Mitzrayim a positive formative experience? I think that there can be many answers, but two immediately come to mind. Number one is that our commitment to the less fortunate is rooted in our experience in Mitzrayim. The Chumash itself says that you should love a ger. Why? Because va'atam yadatam is nefesh hager. You know the soul of a ger, of a stranger. You know how he feels and the encouragement he needs. Ki gerim me'isem be'eretz Mitzrayim, because you were gerim in Mitzrayim. So therefore, since we had that experience of being gerim, therefore we treat gerim better. Not as some would be tempted to say, that if we've been persecuted, now it's our turn to persecute other people. We were tormented, now we'll torment somebody else. No, to the contrary, we were tormented, and therefore we have no desire to do it to anybody else. To the contrary, we have a commitment to that type of social justice. Now this is why in Israel today there is such compassion for the Palestinians. Whereas the world has got it all wrong. Right? The world is convinced that we are tormenting them, because we are treating them as no nation would treat its enemies. We give them electricity, we give them water, we give them money, etc. We risk our soldiers' lives in order to prevent a collateral damage when we fight those who inflict terror upon our people. I mean, there's no nation in the world that would do that. And when I say there's no nation, I mean even the United States wouldn't do it. Never did it. And, the demands they made of Israel are totally outrageous. But it's a fact that Israel feels this tremendous compassion, because we know what it's like to be tormented, and therefore we're committed not to do it to anybody else.
But many nations throughout history have been tormented, and their reaction was the exact opposite. There's something about Bnei Yisrael
That's what I'm saying. That's the moral standard the Yisrael holds us up to. That you learn from your experience. Don't do it to anybody else.
Whereas they do the exact opposite.
I understand. That's exactly what I'm saying. There's a great temptation to do the exact opposite. What was done for me, I'll do to you. Now, the next thing I think we see is that the experience of Mitzrayim was a conditioning in the area of bitachon, of hope. That when you go through the bleakest possible situation, where everything seems so dark and hopeless, and you are redeemed, then you know that there's no point in ever falling into despair, because salvation can always come. And I think that's the idea. First, we identify the matzah, halach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate in Egypt. Right? We are facing up to the fact. We are commemorating not only the liberation, we are commemorating the enslavement. Why? Number one, because it is the basis of our commitment to helping the less fortunate. And therefore that leads into our statement that we wish that all that are hungry would find their way to our door. All who are needy would find their way to our table. As I pointed out, that if you are aware of people in need, certainly the invitation should have been extended beforehand. And undoubtedly it was. But let's say there are other people that you're not aware of. And at the Seder, you'd have a knock on your door, and someone would come in and say, listen, it's the Seder night, I have no place to go, can I join you? That person would be the guest of honor. There'd be nobody more welcome than that person who came to the door. But you wouldn't say, well, we only have this many plates, this many chairs, and this much. The person comes to your door, you're overjoyed that someone in need felt close enough to be able to ask to join. And that's really a consequence of having been enslaved in Mitzrayim. And that's what we say, that this is the bread of affliction, and therefore whoever is hungry, we wish that person should come. And then, to the extent that the enslavement conditioned us to hope, therefore we continue with the prayer that now we are here in Galus, but hopefully we'll be next year in Eretz Yisrael. This year we are enslaved. Next year may we be free. Now, needless to say, that we don't say this with the fervor that it was said many other times. We live in a time that our Galus in Canada is very, very cushy. But remember that the Seder was conducted in many, many difficult places, in many difficult times, where the prayer had more poignance. But we understand exactly what it means. That the Pesach teaches us hope. And I think if you recall, we talked about this the first week that we were learning, the difference in Purim and Pesach. In other words, Pesach teaches us that there is hope for a better future. Purim teaches us that God is with us even in the worst of situations. But Pesach is all about hope. And by the way, that's why all the downtrodden peoples always turned to Pesach and the symbols of Pesach and the story of Pesach as being symbolic of their journeys to the Promised Land. Whether it's the labor union movement or
spirituals
or whatever.
Slave music.
Okay, so this is the significance of being enslaved in a generic sense. Wherever we would have been enslaved, these objectives could have been fulfilled. But the question is, why Mitzrayim of all places? Yeah.
The second reason that we're saying that it teaches you that no matter what situation you're in, there's always going to be. What happens if there is a situation that's worse? Like let's say there's a gauze that's longer than it, or more people are tortured than Mitzrayim. Then we're.
You know, the fact that something is longer doesn't mean that it's worse. You know, the Midrashim, we're going to refer to some of them, point out no one ever escaped Mitzrayim. There never was a slave that escaped Mitzrayim. That means if you were a slave in Mitzrayim, it was absolutely hopeless. It was unimaginable. No one could even understand how it is possible to contemplate liberation. I don't know if Jews ever found themselves in a situation like that. But as bleak as it was, there always was a scenario that came to mind, what could happen. So the fact that it was relatively short in comparison to our Galdos, I don't know if that's a major factor. The Maral devotes a chapter to this. The Maral in the Sefer Gvuras Hashem devotes the 4th chapter to an explanation of why is it the Jews were enslaved in Egypt specifically. And the point he makes is that enslavement has to be under a nation which is your opposite. That they are the antithesis of everything you stand for and believe. Now you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. Imagine a little boy who is enslaved to a master whose objective is to consume or have consumed a very, very large amount of candy. You know, as I have rooms full of candy, I want to get rid of it, and the most effective way is that it should be eaten. So now you are given the job of eating your way through this candy. Right? It's an enslavement. Will the boy think that's a very bitter enslavement?
Not on the first day.
Not the first day, right? But that's the idea. The idea is that an enslavement has to be that you're enslaved to a master whose objectives are totally contrary to your welfare. In other words, if the master gives you a job and says, you're going to do X, Y, Z, but X, Y, and Z are exactly what you want to do anyway, it's not a very bitter enslavement.
Isn't that the very contrast of becoming Eved Hashem?
That's the idea. In other words, the idea of being an Eved Hashem is not merely a change of ownership. I mean, this is the question. How do we speak of Pesach being Zman Cheruseinu? We're still slaves. It's just a change of ownership. We were slaves to power, now we're slaves to Ribono Shel Olam. The answer is that to be a servant of Ribono Shel Olam is not a servitude at all. Because if the only thing your master wants is what is for your benefit, then you are really working for yourself. In other words, let me explain a little better. The difference between a slave and a ben chayrin, a slave and a free man, is not what some people think. People think that a slave has to work and a free man can do whatever he wants. It's not really true. Because we all consider ourselves free men, we have responsibilities. We have to get up, we have to go to work, we have to support our families, etc. Everyone has responsibilities. What is the difference between a slave and a free man? The difference is not that the slave works and the free man can goof around all day. The difference is that whatever the slave is doing is to benefit his master. He's not doing anything for himself. And whatever the ben chayrin is doing is ultimately to benefit himself. Because he could be working very, very hard at a job, but the objective is to earn a wage and enrich himself. That's what it means to be ben chayrin. And Eved Hashem is the ben chayrin. Why? Because since the master's only interest is not for himself, God has no self-interest. It's only in what is good for you. So therefore, when you serve God, you are working ultimately for yourself, for your own benefit. That's what it means to be a ben chayrin.